folks, Ariel over here, sitting in the shade of the existing trees to talk about other trees we're planting. It's actually a little bit overcast today and might rain. There has been not a drop of rain for exactly 31 days today, and it just may put down some moisture today, which would be awesome for all the things we're planting. Anyway, the trees I'm sitting under here are mostly poplars. This is what was on the property when we bought it. There's a few like wild currants like this right here behind me. Barely is having fun playing in the creek. If you're wondering about the background noise, that is the creek burbling right back there behind me. And anyway, so this kind of line along the creek had trees because it had the most moisture and fun sticks to chew on when you're a burlap. Anyway, so it's the one shady spot now. What I wanted from the start, I like living in the trees like I did before. He's gonna go chew that into wood chips. I like the shade, I like the shelter, and all the various huge amount of things you couldn't possibly cover in a single video that trees can do for you. So I knew when we ended up with a place that was mostly open, which was probably going to be likely since we were looking for a place that was also had southern exposure. If you look on all the hills around here in the mountains and such, you will notice that the south-facing stuff all tends to be bare dry, sometimes just rocks, sometimes grass, sometimes small shrubs, but very rarely trees. And the north side of the slope, it will be heavily treed because it retains more moisture and gets less sun. I lived on a north slope before, the whole time I was in that clearing, so that's why it was very, very heavily treed. If you just went up to the top of that slope and down on the other side, there was no trees at all. And so it was wonderful for the trees. Of course, it kind of sucked for gardening because there wasn't really enough light for a lot of the plants. It sucked for having solar panels, all kinds of other things. So I knew I wanted southern exposure, but that also probably meant there wasn't going to be a lot of trees already existing. And there wasn't. So I planned to fix that. I invented a name that I'm calling a Fedgorist, which I don't think I've heard anyone else use. You may have, if you are familiar with the permaculture world at all, or even just some gardening stuff, whatever, you may be familiar with fedges, which are what people call a hedge when you plant it with food-producing items, hence food hedge or fedge. I wanted something along those lines, except mine's going to be a little bigger than just a typical hedge, so at least over time, it doesn't look that way now. So I'm calling it a Fedgorist because it's going to be a food hedge forest strip. But basically the one property line I'm sitting in right now is treed like this, and the other three lines, it's not exactly a rectangle, but it's kind of close-ish, are pretty much wide open, or they were before I started planting them closed. So I want them planted closed for some privacy, a little bit of a windbreak, because of course there's more breezes out in the wide open than there was in the thick trees. I want them to produce shade, places for birds to sit and sing. You can probably hear some birds chirping in the background. Lots of birds are nesting and have their babies climbing out of the nest right now, but they are mostly in this treed line. Want to produce food for us, food for wild animals and birds, for our poultry, for bees, bugs, all that kind of stuff. So, what have I been planting? I actually have this binder here because I wanted to make notes so I wouldn't forget things and would be able to remember the details about things. But what I've got in here is one page each of info I collected on everything I've planted. First, several people ask what I thought about planting native versus non-natives. We are planting every native that lives in this area. That is not very many things. That's basically a couple kinds of pines, spruces, and firs, aspen trees, cottonwoods. They'll only grow right in the water, basically are right beside it, so they would only survive right along the creek line. And then some bushes, like there are wild currants and so on. And of the things that grow here wild like that, I'm planting wild ones because currants are fairly easy to start. And I'm planting cultivated varieties of that. So I'm planting some cultivated currant varieties that are cold hardy and tend to have a little bigger fruit, be a little more productive, a little easier to clean, all that. And the same thing for there are wild strawberries that grow in this area. I'm also planting cultivated strawberries. So everything that grows here, there are wild elderberries. I'm planting some more cultivated varieties as well for better food production. So everything that does grow here, we're planting all that plus more. And for some of the wild trees, some of the pines and conifers and aspens and such, on the place where I used to live, there are a bunch of big hayfields, including one that was very close to where my house was parked, just out of sight through the trees. And there's constantly, the forest is sending up new little shoots of stuff out into the hayfield where they will just get mowed off. So last fall, and then some this spring, and probably again this fall, we went around and, Clay helped me dig up any of the little, some really little, some a little bit bigger, but some very little seedlings of trees where they were coming up out into a meadow edge. So those were entirely wild trees that propagated themselves. They were gonna not live where they were because they're gonna be mowed off and killed. But the majority of them that we dug up have so far survived. We lost a couple little pines. I think they just didn't make the transplant, but the other 7 are doing good. It's been too hot now to do any more transplanting of stuff like that without really stressing it out until fall. Aspen trees, things like that. But in addition to that, I wanted to plant other food productive things as well. So my theory on native versus non-native, and this is true for how I think about animals, plants, all kinds of things, is that I'm often not sure that people actually know what is native. What is native to right here? What was here when I moved in last year? What was here 200 years ago? What was here before Columbus found this continent? What was here after the flood? Who knows? And I think people often don't know because I have experience with people claiming, oh, such and such is non-native, and there are people who live here, for 70 years being like, that thing was here when I was a child. I saw it, but somebody else saying, oh, it didn't arrive till 10 years ago or something. So I think there's some debate there that people often don't know, and what you call native versus not is, I think, up for debate. But anyway, I don't want to plant something that's going to be super invasive and cause problems for neighboring farms or, choke out all the stuff that is already growing, that kind of thing. So if there's something with known issues in my area and my climate like that, I'm not planting that. But pretty much everything else that has a chance of growing here in the cold and can make productive food for people. Not many plants make productive food for dogs. If it can make productive food for chickens or ducks, for wild birds, or for pollinators, I'm planting it if it has a chance of surviving. So I've got everything from like crab apples to various kinds of eating and preserving apples, all the coldest hardy varieties I can find, various nut trees and bushes, from chestnuts to butternuts to heart nuts, any of the varieties that have a chance again of surviving here that should make edible nuts. Some various flowering things, like some bushes and trees do lots of things, like some of those nut trees, they make flowers that the birds feed from, and especially the bees feed from, and then they make a productive nut that us or poultry or whatever could also eat. So a lot of trees, of course, are multifunctional and do lots of things. And then some things that are just pretty and beautiful, like lilacs and so on. But lots of berry bushes as well, different kinds of berries, high bush cranberries, hackberries, viburnum berries or nanny berries, just lots and lots of hawthorns, witch hazels. Some of these make edible for human berries, and some make edible for birds and wildlife berries. And I even planted a few sugar maples. I don't think we'll ever get the correct weather here to make the sap run, but I thought it'd be fun to try if the weather ever did cooperate with that. Plus, maples are, of course, a beautiful tree, and it's nice to have some variety. Let's see, obviously I've got lots of stuff here, different kinds of walnuts, mulberries, they're borderline on being able to survive here, and so on. You get the idea. Pretty much, if it can grow here, if it's productive for anything, and if it, is not known to be an issue, because there are, of course, plants that can be invasive in some warm areas that can't even survive here, or vice versa. So what is invasive and problematic depends a lot on your climate. Planted various kinds of grapes, that are supposed to be cold hardy, various kinds of roses that make a good edible rose hip, and again, wild roses grow here, but I planted some that should get a much bigger rose hip that's easier to harvest. Various kinds of elderberries and crab apples, like Siberian pea shrubs. They make a pea pod that's not edible to people, but that birds and chickens love, and they make a flower that bees love, and they're very hardy, so they should help, support and shelter some of the other things as they grow. And they're a nitrogen fixer, so they do like 4 jobs, even though they don't make something that I can eat or Clay can eat. But they're doing multiple other things to support everything else. So I've got my whole collection of notes here, just kind of on the tendencies of all the different plants, and then I'm making notes that I planted 2 this year or 3 this year, and then through time I want to note how they did, because I don't expect that all this stuff is going to survive. I think I may have already lost a few things because it has been blistering hot. Like I said, there's been no rain for a month, and it's been in the 90s. That is, for June, that is extremely unusual for here. It's been crazy hot every day, and then right in the middle of all of that heat, about a week and a half ago, maybe 10 days ago, it froze hard. It was 27 degrees Fahrenheit. And that is a very, very hard freeze. And so even some of the native trees and stuff that were just starting to push out their little baby leaves, encouraged by all the extra heat, when their leaves are that new and that sensitive, some of even the native stuff already growing froze or burnt or got partially damaged. And definitely some of the stuff I had planted that was just pushing out its new leaves, well, it probably is cold hardy enough to survive that. And some of them are growing back out from under that damage, and some may not. I don't know where it was a brand new transplant, had almost no established roots, no established leaves, nothing, and its very first leaves it sent out got all frost burnt off. That may have killed a couple of the little seedlings, which is sad. I'm not pulling anything out yet. Some, as you can see, are sending out new growth under that blackened stuff that got froze off. So hopefully everything survives that, but that was hard to go from 90, 90, 90 down to multiple degrees below freezing and then straight back to 90 2 days later. That was, and there was 2 nights where it froze hard ice on everything, hard ice on the bird bath, hard white frost on the grass, the roof, everything. That was kind of tough on things. But that's what I'm working on. And, planting all the edges in, kind of trying to think about, again, how a natural forest would grow. Like, this is what's growing here. There's the bigger trees that are poplars. There's the smaller bushes, like the currants growing under them. And I'm trying to plant things kind of like that. So I'll plant a few pines, then I'll plant a clump of aspens, then I'll plant a maple in between, then I'll plant some chestnut bushes under over here, and some currant bushes under over there, and some raspberries along here, so that as it grows up, you don't end up with, I think of them as like soldiers marching in a row, where you have this lane and there's this neat, orderly row of single pine trees or something going down the side of the lane. That is not the look I'm going for. What I'd like is that if everything grows and in a few years when it starts to look like something, and like Clay joked, it'll be nice when some of your trees are taller than the grass, they'll look like trees. If, when you look at it, you just think, oh, it's a strip of forest, because it is going to be somewhat a strip, because we are going around the edges of the property, because we want some clearing space in the middle still to garden and do that kind of thing. We wanted some of the open space, just not all of it to be open. But where you look at it and you'll just think, oh, that looks natural, much like what I'm sitting in now looks natural. It doesn't, it's not, oh, well, that's a clearly planted, regimented row of something artificial. So hopefully it all fills in, they support each other, because of course, in nature things work together. The berry bushes provide an understory for the bigger trees provide shelter for the bushes, the lower growing stuff fills in. Oh, and that's the other thing that's not trees and bushes, but I've worked at getting started a whole kind of ground cover, carpet, fertilizer, moisture holding layer of things that do well very low. So I've planted a mixture of different clovers, which are pretty cold hardy, some daikon radishes, which are good at sending down big tap roots and helping loosen the soil and feed the earthworms and add nutrients to the soil that way. Plus they send up a beautiful yellow flower that all the pollinators love. And we could eat some, and we might, but I put out thousands of seeds, so they're certainly not all intended to eat. They're intended to help nourish the ground and be a ground cover. That stuff is all coming up. I put out some winter hardy peas that they won't actually survive our winter here. They can just survive our summers and hopefully maybe falls here. And peas, of course, are a nitrogen fixer like other legumes, and so they will hopefully grow up and bloom. And again, they're a forage pea, so they're normally grown for like feeding cows and that kind of thing, not for human consumption. But I know you want your stick thrown. They are supposed to help, feed the ground and nourish the ground. And when they freeze hard this winter and die back and just rot back into the soil, that'll be adding more organic matter and nourishing and mulching into the soil, hopefully without much work. I planted some sunflower seeds all around because they grow up fast, and I don't know if I got them in early enough this year for them to actually make mature sunflower seeds, but eventually I'd like to be producing a harvestable crop of some sunflowers here for feeding my own wild birds and chickens and ducks. So all that stuff is growing down low, and then I'm planting in all of my other useful herbs, mints, which do well here, and they make a great ground cover and ground shade under bigger bushes and trees. That's how I was growing them in the old clearing. Comfrey, which is excellent at pulling up nutrients, and when you chop and drop it or it dies back, that adds a lot of nutrients into the ground. So and even just strawberries. My cultivated ones make runners all the time, more than fit in their strawberry beds. So then I take their extra runners and go plant them under trees and stuff. And I'm not worried about whether or not I get the strawberries off that. Probably the birds and such will eat all of them. But they still make a beautiful ground cover. They bloom beautiful little flowers, and then they feed all the other things when they make little strawberries. So I'm working on getting, hopefully, all of that working together. Right now, most of it still looks like a grass patch. But hopefully in a few years, that's going to look very different as all these things start to work together and support each other. And the other thing is trying to get this established. And this year has just been, the weather's been particularly awful for what I wanted to do. It would have helped if there was a lot of days like this, more rainy and cool and overcast for getting things established, because right now there's a lot of hot sun out there. But it hasn't been that way, so I'm very thankful for the ability to water all of that. And yeah, I am using a sprinkler because I'm never just watering this, apple tree I've planted right here. I'm watering the apple tree, the clovers, the peas, the strawberries, the comfrey, the currant bush, everything that you can't really see yet because there's so little growing up around it as well. But I'm thankful for the ability to have kept stuff watered to get it through the heat. But hopefully within a couple years, the need for any kind of artificial irrigation like that will be completely gone, because it will get established and be more like the area I'm sitting in now, where the taller trees help direct the moisture down to the ground, the bushes help retain it, the ground covery little stuff helps mulch the soil, you get the decaying leaves and bits of wood and stuff that mulch it all, and so hopefully over time it will become a totally self-sustaining little strip of forest that goes around the property. And requires no more human intervention. And then long after I'm dead, hopefully it will be still producing, crops for anybody who came along could pick lots of berries and nuts and fruits, and the birds will be nesting, and it will just hopefully become its own productive system. Because like somebody said, it's great to work with nature, but sometimes you have to give nature something to work with. And what we've got here, other than this strip I'm sitting in, is an old abandoned commercially farmed hayfield that had everything else stripped out of it and was used as a dump. Not the whole thing, but part of it was used as a dump, and there's, it would be one thing if people had just put all their branches in there and burned them, and so on. But there's also bits of broken glass we've been cleaning up and stuff like that. So hopefully we can help the land kind of heal and recover and make it beautiful and private and lush, and help undesertify. Desertification is the process of something turning into a desert, not into a dessert like a cake, into a desert like the dry, dead-looking places. And that's a very real potential in a place that is so borderline dry. I forget I think anything below, it's either 10 or 11 inches of annual precipitation is officially considered a desert. I'm not sure on the exact number, it's somewhere right around there. And our area gets about 15 inches of precipitation, mostly in the form of snow, every year. So we're not quite a desert, but we're not very far off from it. So everything I can do to help the ground mulch and retain its own moisture and stuff like that is going to be very, very helpful. And there's some amazing documentaries out there that are just super inspiring. But you made it so little. How am I supposed to throw that? You chewed it all out. It's so little. About people taking actual deserts, like sand pile, dry, dead, not a single green stalk of anything growing deserts, and using these same kind of principles for working with how nature would actually work, by giving it some help to get started, turning them into lush green spots. My spot isn't quite that extreme, but I think it can be a lot more healthy and productive and lush and useful for the wild things, the tame things, and the people, and with a little help, hopefully, can get it established. So for everyone wondering about what I'm planting, and am I going to plant this, and am I going to plant that, if it's a plant I know of that's useful for something, and it has a chance of surviving a zone 3 climate. Of course, as I've talked about before, the growing zones only have to do with how cold it gets on the coldest day of the year. Now that is somewhat useful, because if if an apple tree will die when it gets to -20, and it gets to -30, it will be dead, even if it only does that for one day. But what a growing zone does not tell you at all is how many days of the year it is that cold. Does it get to -20 for one day sometime in January? Or does it get to -20 for 200 consecutive days? Or once it's not -20, is it 6 degrees below freezing in the middle of June? So growing zone is a useful piece of information, but it's only one piece of information. So there are people who are like, oh, I can grow XYZ in my zone 3 area, you can too. And there are things I've tried and they just don't make it here because it's too cold for too long. Again, if you're newer here, there is 7-ish months of winter, I would say, here. In my last clearing, there was more like 8. Now we got like 7-ish months of winter, and the potential for hard freezes all summer long still. So that's a challenge. And there's only so many things that will grow there. But yes, if it's useful and not harmful to other things, like I said, I don't want to, have something that invades all my neighbors' hay fields and causes headaches for them or something like that. There's no known harms, and there's fortunately not many things that are that invasive around here because there are so few things that even survive here. Then I'm planting it and seeing if I can get it to grow. And hopefully some of the stuff that got burnt in that hard freeze as it was trying to get growing, a week or so ago, hopefully it survives and grows out. But I've got a little over 200 trees and bushes planted so far. And again, a lot of them don't look like a lot. Some actually look like small trees right now, and some just look like little sticks, partly because I have a limit to my finances, and I bought, a lot of bare root plants and I want to do a video talking about, planting bare root plants as opposed to potted plants, because I've done a bunch of that now. And so, some were big and some were very, very, very little. So that allowed me to get a lot, to be able to afford to buy a lot more than if I had bought just individual big potted plants, and hopefully get a lot more things established around the entire property perimeter. Some of them are going to take quite a while to actually look like anything substantial. The other advantage, though, is sometimes when something is little and grows up in that spot, it actually ends up tougher and hardier and better adapted than when it was bigger in a pot and then transplanted. I can't really throw that one very well while I'm sitting in the trees, because that one's too big. I know I told you the other one was too small, but this one's kind of too big. Okay, that's all. He loves this game, as you can probably tell. So anyway, that's the general gist of what we're planning. Hopefully in a few years, when you see pictures or videos around here, this is going to look a whole lot different, and there's going to be a little forest strip that will look something like what I'm sitting under now around the entire property perimeter, giving us some shelter and protection and privacy, food, and all of those benefits. And then we'll have a nice clearing area in the middle with plenty of sunshine for growing vegetables and running around in the yard and having the chickens and ducks peck around and scratch and all of that kind of stuff. So that's just generally kind of my philosophy and what I'm thinking out and what I'm planning, and I generally like to just do things and then show you how they worked, but right now I'm in the process of doing, and I can't show you how it worked yet, because with things like trees and bushes, that's going to take some time. But I'm hopeful that in 3 to 5 years, it's going to look a whole lot different, and and from there on out, just exponentially more so. And we'll be able to have a beautiful little Fedgorist that's producing food and being a forest and a hedge all around the property. And maybe that gives you some inspirational ideas I'm going to link below to a few of those. Yeah, baby, you're kind of wet. A few of those little videos that really inspired me, with people transforming actual deserts back into lush, productive areas for human and animal habitation. And wish for all of my trees and bushes to grow really fast and get big. You guys have a wonderful day. Over here at Nyth, thank you so much for watching these videos and spending some of your very valuable time choosing to do that. We hope you found something that was useful, educational, helpful, maybe save someone else some time and trouble, or just something just plain beautiful. If you don't want to miss any videos, subscribe and hit the bell. And thanks for coming along on our journey as we build a new little homestead with our tiny house and everything to come.